Looking forward to that. Last Monday night, we were honored and blessed to have here in our sanctuary the Rabbi Moshe Silbershine. Moshe lives in Israel and teaches classes there to Jews and to Christians. And last Monday, he spoke to this group called The Gathering, or it was sponsored by The Gathering, this event. And he expressed how thankful he was for the Christians who added the chapters and the verses to the Bible. Originally, each book of the Bible was written without any breaks from beginning to end. Can you imagine? You could spend an entire Bible study just trying to find a passage. The chapters of the Bible were added in the 13th century by a Catholic priest named Stephen Langdon. That's a good trivia question for someone. The verses within the chapters were added in the 15th century. Many translations of the Bible have also added titles or section headings for the different passages and stories in the 66 books of the Bible. I have no idea when someone decided to add these titles or section headings. The story that was read today from the Gospel of Luke often has the heading or title, The Parable of the Prodigal Son. We have no idea what Jesus called the story, if he called it anything at all. Again, these titles or section headings are fairly modern additions to the Bible. The word prodigal means wastefully extravagant or recklessly excessive. And we see how that relates to the younger son who took all of his inheritance and wasted it with excessive spending and living. He was wastefully extravagant and recklessly excessive. But in 21st century America, there is nothing so unusual about a young man deciding to leave his father's home to seek his fortune in the world. In fact, we kind of see that as a good thing, don't we? I mean, like Daniel Boone, the rugged individual off on an adventure, has kind of become an American icon. The younger son did what the young men are born to do. He may have hurt his father in the process, but his father understood since he probably did the same thing himself. There's an Irish song called The Wild Rover. The words go like this: I've been a wild rover for many a year. I've spent all me money on whiskey and beer. But now I'm returning with gold in great store, and I never will play the wild rover no more. I'll go home to my parents, confess what I've done, and I'll ask them to pardon their prodigal son. And when they've caressed me as oft times before, I never will play the wild rover no more. It's believed that this song was written to be a temperance song, to discourage people from drinking during the temperance movement. This song has made a bit of a comeback. It's become popular again. Guess where this song is sung most often now? That's right. Bars, Irish pubs. I'm sure it will be sung many times a week from Thursday in bars and pubs all over the world. It was a song designed to discourage people from drinking, and it's become the drinkers' national anthem. Because there is something we like about people living on the edge, being wild and free until they crash, of course. And so when the prodigal son goes off, he's off on the American adventure. When he fails at the American ideal of worldly success, all is not lost. At least he's gained some wisdom. He discovers the value of his home. He asks his father for forgiveness. He was lost, but now is found. Yes, he still has to work some things out with his big brother, but he's been restored to his family and to his father's love, sadder but wiser for all he had brought upon himself. Viewed in this way, the story should be called the parable of the prodigal son, a story about the vastness of a father's love available to a wasteful and ignorant son who returns home with true repentance in his heart. Many interpret this story as being about our individual relationship with God. The Father, of course, represents God. When we decide to go home and say we're sorry, we know that we will be forgiven. And we can be assured that a banquet awaits us, the improbable feast given by a Father whose divine grace exceeds all human reason. That's a wonderful truth to pull from this story. But as Rabbi Silvershine reminded us on Monday, a parable usually doesn't just have one answer or one truth. It doesn't usually reveal one path. In fact, the mystery and wonder of a parable is that the more you look and study it, the more you look at it, the truth seems to grow and become more powerful and even more meaningful. For instance, we should consider what it was probably like for this story to have been heard by a Middle Eastern audience, hearing it from a Middle Eastern storyteller in the 1st century. What does Jesus know about the dynamics of this story that we do not know because he told it in a very different world? For one thing, his world was largely agricultural. Chances are that 90% of Jesus' listeners were farmers, like the family in the story. Their land was their livelihood. They received it in trust from their ancestors, and they held it in trust for their children. There was no courthouse where they could record their claims to it. Those claims were kept in the memory of the community, where honor was everything. Break faith with the community or lose its respect, and your property lines might be forgotten just like that. A great deal depended on having good neighbors and being a good neighbor. When you needed help getting your crops in before the rain comes, or building a barn, or help having a baby, or digging a grave, you counted on the neighbors the same way they counted on you. You traded a dozen of your chickens for one of their lambs. You invited them to your parties, and they invited you to theirs. If things worked out the way they were supposed to, then your children married their children, strengthening the kinship bonds between your clans and linking your farms in a patchwork family quilt. In this world, an individual had little meaning apart from his or her family. We don't see it in the South as much as we used to, but you go out into the rural parts of South Georgia, and you can still get a taste of it. People do not look at you and say, well, there goes Casey Jo Durrance. They say, she's a Durrance. And they know exactly what they mean by that. They might even say, she's the Durrance's youngest. Was all set to marry that Hagen's boy until she got it into her head to go to the big city. Came back last month with 2 little ones who don't look like nobody. Like to broke her family's heart, and the Hagens too. Those 2 families used to be so tight, now they don't have a thing to say to each other. But you know how the Hagans are. They'll be all right. Why, I hear that boy of theirs is already engaged to a Hester. Yeah. Now, won't that be a match? You see, also, since it was an agricultural world, it was important to have children, especially boys who could work the land, boys who could stay home and not run off. That would be a sin and a dishonor. It was assumed sons would stay home and work the land. There are other things about Jesus' Middle Eastern world that I have no reference for, such as the huge honor owed the patriarch of a clan and the elaborate code for keeping that honor in place. Patriarchs, for instance, did not run. Patriarchs did not leave their places at the heads of their tables when guests were present. Patriarchs did not plead with their children. They told their children what to do. And if children did not obey, they were cut off from the family. Told in this kind of culture, today's parable becomes a story about a weak patriarch with an absentee wife and two sons he can't seem to control. A weak patriarch who is willing to sacrifice his honor to keep his community together. From this perspective, it's more of a reunion story and not so much a repentance story. It's about the high cost of reconciliation, in which individual worth and identity and rightness all go down the drain so that people may live together in peace. When the younger son asks for his share of the family property, he deals his father a double blow. He not only means to break up the estate, he also means to leave his father, who counts on both of his sons to care for him in his old age. No assisted living, no nursing homes back then. But the younger son is not thinking about his father, not thinking about his family's honor or his village or the family farm. He's thinking about himself, what he needs, what he wants. Staying in relationship is not high on his list of priorities. Being his own person is. Getting out of town to find himself. Whatever his reasons, he asks for his share of the family property, and his father responds to the double blow with a double turning of the cheek. He not only divides his property between his sons, though he is still very much alive, he also allows his younger son to sell his share so that the boy can liquidate his assets and take them with him when he leaves. What kind of patriarch cannot prevent his son from carving up the family farm? Does the boy have no shame? What is a bag of money compared to land that has fed his ancestors for generations? When people see the father in town, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know if they should shun him or feel sorry for him. And since they can't decide, they stop inviting him to their parties. But he doesn't look like he's in the mood for a party anyway. It's as if his son has died. And after a while, people stop talking about whose fault that is. The father is still part of the community, and the community protects him. The only way that boy of his is ever going to step foot back inside that town is to come back 10 times richer than he left, with fabulous presents for every member of his family and enough left over to buy back the farm. Then he will have to throw a banquet and invite the whole community, honoring them as extravagantly as he shamed them when he left. But of course, this is not what happens. Instead, the younger son loses everything. And he loses it, folks, to Gentiles. Pagan pig owners, complete strangers to the God of Israel. What he does is so reprehensible that the Talmud describes a ceremony to deal with it, to punish a Jewish boy who loses the family inheritance to Gentiles. Here's how it works. If he ever shows up in his village again, then the villagers can fill a large earthenware jug with burned nuts and corn, break it in front of the son, and shout out his name out loud, pronouncing him cut off from his people. After that, he will be a cosmic orphan who might as well go back and live with the pigs. Apparently, the boy's only hope is to reach his father before the villagers reach him. He has his confession ready. He isn't returning home out of love, and he won't pretend that he is. He's returning home out of hunger. He is returning to apply for a job as a hired hand on what is left of the family farm. If he can earn enough to pay back what he has lost, then perhaps he can dodge the outcasting ceremony. So he heads home, rehearsing his confession as he goes. He's ready to take the initiative. But someone must have seen him coming and told his father, because his father is on the lookout for him. And when his father sees him while he is still far off, and his father is filled with compassion, and then his father does one of those things that patriarchs do not do. His father runs to his son. Runs so that everyone can see his pale ankles. Runs so that his robes get wedged between his legs and flutter out behind him like an apron. He runs like a girl, like a mother instead of a father. He runs and puts his arms around his son and kisses him right there on the road where everyone can see him. Great men never run in public, said Aristotle. The father's disregard of this advice may spring from affection, but of course it's protection too. For if the father can get to the son before the villagers, then he can save his son from being cut off. He can save his relationship with his son and his family's relationship with the village all at the same time. This reconciliation will cost him his honor, his greatness in others' eyes. But that is a price he is willing to pay. The father runs like a girl to greet his son before anyone can treat him like an outcast or a hired hand. And then he turns to his slaves and he tells them to bring his son the best robe in the house, which would be his own robe, and to put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. He orders his servants to kill the fatted calf, not a goat, not a lamb or a dozen chickens, but a calf, a clear sign that the celebration about to take place is not a quiet family affair, but a feast for everyone, for the entire village. It's a feast to restore the family's honor, as well as a feast to restore the family's son. It's the banquet of reconciliation for anyone who will come. And just like that, before anyone really has time to process what a genius he is, the father throws a banquet before the townspeople can throw an outcasting ceremony. The son is saved. He is saved by being restored to relationship with his father, his family, his village, who are also saved by the father's willingness, to be a really bad patriarch. For you see, the reconciliation of his community means more to him than his honor. The restoration of relationship means more to him than being thought great or thought right or even a good father. His son's salvation cost him almost as much as his son's abandonment of him in the first place, yet he never says a word about the price. If there ever was a man who deserved a happy ending, it was this man. But you know as well as I do what happens next. His own other son shows up, hears the music and the dancing, and refuses to go into the house. No one asked him whether he wanted to be reconciled with his good-for-nothing brother. No one asked him. He's the good son. He's done everything right, and he isn't about to sit down at the same table with the self-centered, pig-loving, sin-sick brother who has caused his family so much grief. And so the older son refuses to go into the house. A terrible insult to his father, right there in front of everyone. The only way for the father to save the evening is to stay right where he is at the head of the table, ignoring his older son's conspicuous absence until his guests leave, and he can go outside to slap the boy silly. But you know this man. You know this father. He won't do that. His honor means nothing to him where relationships are concerned. He will do anything to keep his people together. And so he goes out to his good son the same way he went out to his bad one. Only not running this time, because honestly he's worn out with these warring, wasteful children of his, of how little it means to them to belong to one another, of how much more interested they are in being fulfilled and fed or blameless and right than they are in being reconciled with each other, as if securing their own identities were more important to them than living in peace with him and one another. If they would just ask him, he could tell them that peace always involves a profound crisis of identity. You can't have peace and stay exactly who you are, or even who you want to be. Sometimes you have to make huge concessions, sacrificing things as concrete as fields that have been in the family forever, along with things as intangible as honor and greatness and rightness and self-respect. Sometimes you have to run like a girl to protect your kin, even those who have done you irreparable harm. It's all a matter of priorities. And for this father, reunion is all that matters. Reunion finds the lost and brings them home. Reunion brings the dead back to life. And so some people think this story should be called the parable of the prodigal father, because the father's actions seem so strange, so radical. His love and forgiveness so excessive, so extravagant, foolish, radically excessive. If the father in this story represents God, then can you and I embrace the kind of radical, extravagant love that God has for us? It sounds too good to be true. And so we don't believe it, don't accept it, and we live with inferiority complexes and with anxiety and all sorts of insecure feelings. Imagine how we would live if we truly believed the great creator of the universe loved us the way this Father loved his sons. And what about this? What if the Father in this story also represents you? The late, great Henry Nouwen said that one day he had a long discussion with one of his close friends. And after talking with her about identifying with the younger son or the older son in this story, she said to him, "Whether you are the younger son or the older son, you have to realize that you are called to become like the Father." Isn't that the real question for us as well? Do we want to be like the Father? The foolish, excessive Father who makes relationships the priority, even when it means dishonoring ourselves or embarrassing ourselves, swallowing our pride, and forgiving. Corrie ten Boom, the great woman who survived a Nazi concentration camp, realized how vital forgiveness is to experience life in its fullness. She said, "Forgiveness is to set a prisoner free and to realize the prisoner was you." So will you and I be like the prodigal father who realizes, yes, there's a place for counting and holding people accountable. But when it comes to relationships, grace always rules. Amen and amen.